Testing has emerged as a mantra in combating the spread of coronavirus among populations. And India is often having to hear that they need to be testing more, that by not testing more, they're only delaying the inevitable and making a mistake. But is greater testing alone the answer to beating COVID 19? Say if India just began to test a whole lot more starting tomorrow morning, does that mean that we'd be doing a much better job at combating the problem? I've got a special guest in today's episode to talk about this. He's Aashish Chandorkar. He's an author. He writes regularly on matters of politics and public policy. And he also has a podcast that you might want to check out. It's a good source for intelligent discussions. Ashish, welcome.
Thank you, Karan.
Let me just ask you this straight off the bat, and just starting with the basics. Is India testing less?
So, no, I don't think India is testing less. See, the testing strategy has to be devised with multiple things in mind, and which includes the context in which we are operating. See, if you look relative to other countries, India had put in shutdowns, lockdowns, blockade measures in place much earlier than what other countries had done. Even for foreign travelers, India has had a escalating level of checks and balances built in terms of how people were flying in. So right from January, we were screening passengers from China, and then new countries got added, and then new sophistication got added to the tests, to the checks, and so on. So. In a way, you can say that an effective lockdown and a lot of testing are in a way complementary to each other, right? So if you had the economy open where people were mingling in a great numbers, then potentially the need for testing would be higher. But because see, India shut down. If you remember, the Janta curfew happened around 22nd of March, and at that point of time, India had about 150, 160 cases, right? Uh, the the countries which I mean, if you look at other countries, I mean, Italy shut down on 9th of March, and even then the real shutdown took another couple of days because there was an exodus of people from north to south. In a country like Italy, the shutdown came when they already had about 5,000 cases, and plus there were quite a few hotspots which had got built up across the country. So um,
Right.
the testing of when you already have a shutdown or a lockdown where people aren't mingling with each other, then that itself is a good containment measure. So so testing itself alone would be of no particularly I mean, it wouldn't particularly add up to any great information. Also, the thing is, because in India the denominator will always be high. So I mean, when you say 102 to 100 tests a million or whatever the Indian numbers were a couple of days ago, potentially it's been ramped up in the last 2 3 days. I mean, there's no point in comparing it with other countries because the denominator is quite high and the disease was not that widely spread in India, right? So there's no point in saying, if you look at other countries, uh, the uh, the the positive tests per 100 tests were like in the range of 20 25. I think it was 20 17 or 18 in the USA, about 25 in France, and Spain was as high as 35. India was only reporting 3 to 4 positive tests per 100 tests. So and even in those 3 to 4 tests, we know that there were foreign travelers, and then there was a single source event in Delhi and so on. So there were a lot of other caveats on how the Indian data has built up. So just getting more people to test when lockdown is in place wouldn't be very meaningful. When the testing has to be rapidly scaled up now in zones where the disease has spread. That will be the second stage, and that's what we are entering as per the ICMR guidelines. As of yesterday, several cities are starting to do rapid testing in the containment areas, because that is where, if the lockdown has not been locally effective for whatever reason, if people are still mingling or they're not cooperating, etc., then the testing part becomes more critical, and we are getting there now.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that just greater testing as a formula cannot be, put to use without taking into account the context and the local conditions.
Yes, absolutely. Like when you look at the cities in India, we had public transportation shut down. We had reasonable, I mean, at least the people who are in the white collar jobs were largely working from home. This was enabled even before the national lockdown came in place. Several states had already started working on this around 15th, 16th of March, right? So, with the increasing level of the seriousness which state and the central government had taken up right from the beginning of the month, the more testing would not be necessarily very useful in that situation.
Right. Also, I was thinking since lockdowns were brought in much earlier in India relative to other countries, of course, even if you were to get people to test, I mean, how would you do that? Would you be rounding up people and queuing them up in centers to get testing done? And in fact, in many places, rounding up people and putting them together for testing itself can be a problem, isn't
Yes,
it?
that's a great point, Karan. In fact, the evidence in some of the European countries, especially Italy, shows that a lot of infections actually spread in the hospitals, right? And they spread because people were coming to
Right.
hospitals for testing. Now, creating a testing infrastructure which is not part of the hospital network is a very difficult task for a country like India. I mean, let's face it that we have to fight the illness with the resources which we have, right? So whenever we make a comparison against a different country in terms of what they are doing, the fact is that that doesn't necessarily take into account where we are in our own healthcare network currently, right? So, and because also the healthcare topic itself in India is a three-tier topic. Like there is municipalities involved, there is state governments involved, and there is a central government involvement. And the capability differs very widely across municipal bodies and across state governments, right? So, getting people together outside of a hospital network would have been um almost impossible in India. And getting people in hospitals
Right.
has actually been a bad experience in Europe. Hospitals have been the biggest source of transmission in several countries in Europe. So, yeah, that's a very valid point, and I think that must have been one of the factors when ICMR took the decision, the way they developed the strategy.
Now, looking at India's situation in particular, I think there is a gradual escalation of testing that's lined up. I think India has been doubling its rate of testing. I think it was 5,000 a day. Now it's come to 10,000. And I think the hope is to take it up to 20,000 by the end of the week. And ICMR has also said that it's probably looking at 1 lakh tests a day in a worst case scenario. If that were to present itself, how do you see this playing out over say, a month, a couple of
Right.
months?
So yes, that's true. We I think we did about 10, 11,000 tests yesterday, or which was the latest number in the ICMR press release. The stated aim was to take it to 10,000. Sorry, like a lakh tests a day. The capability has to be built up to to that level. And what will happen now is that there'll be a two-phased testing approach. So there will be like a rapid test type of like a strategy designed for the areas which need to be contained. So for densely populated areas, or where a lot of evacuees are being put up, or where areas which have been sealed locally in several cities, like in Mumbai or in Indore, Jaipur, Ahmedabad. Several cities have had local lockdowns, which are more stringent than the general city level lockdowns. So there would be a rapid test in those areas, and this rapid test, which is like an antibody test, it will not confirm the presence of the disease. It may only tell you that you may be susceptible to the disease. So depending on, so there's a flow chart there where if the antibody test is negative, then there is some precaution to be taken and the medical advice to be taken. If it is positive, uh, then the doctors can advise what is called the RT-PCR test, or the polymerase chain reaction test, which is a confirmatory test for coronavirus. So with the rapid testing, the potential high risk cases will be identified faster, and then they would be the cases which will be put through the actual uh, 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 RT-PCR test. Also, that's been also the case where in India, even although we keep saying that there haven't been enough tests, but the fact is in India, India has only tested the high risk population, and then even within that, there has only been a 3 to 4% positive hit rate. So that's actually a positive thing that
Right.
that this disease hasn't yet spread as much in India, barring maybe in a couple of cities
Right.
where things are not looking as good. But otherwise, even for high risk, the positive ratio, the ratio of positive cases to ratio of total tests is fairly low right now in India. So the rapid testing will actually enable identification of the high risk cases faster, and then they can be put through the confirmatory tests in a much more targeted fashion. So the strategy will now increase the potential candidates for tests as a universe, and then hopefully then the early onset, if any, in any community can be spotted.
Right. Just for my final question, I think going beyond testing itself, I mean, The lockdown will probably be coming to a close in a few days, and then we'll have to sort of redesign the strategy. And of course, there's no don't intend we I don't intend to speculate, but what is your sense of how this transition out of the lockdown should happen? What is your sense of it? Should we be transitioning into another, a different form of lockdown? What is your sense right now?
My sense, Karan, is that the lockdown will extend in some ways. So there could be like a phased lifting of lockdown. So first of all, several states have actually advised the central government, as per reports yesterday, that the lockdown should extend. And I think the reason is that states are afraid about dealing with a potential uh, uh, heavy number of cases given the hospital network infrastructure which they have. So several states do want the lockdowns to actually extend. What might happen is that currently there are about 325 districts which are affected by the 300 or 325 districts which currently have positive number of positive cases. So, but the other 400 districts where there isn't any patient right now, maybe potentially the center may open those districts up for local commerce. They may not allow movement of people across the district borders. Now, the challenge in India is that while all this looks good on paper, I mean, the district boundaries are fairly porous in nature, right? These things are not marked on the ground like the way they are marked in a map. So while that can be the first phase, the fact is that the risk of spread will still be there because there's nothing to stop people from moving through fields or from on rivers or just on foot crossing through hilly terrain, etc. Right? You can't police everything in India. So, but also then there's the question as to what is the cost of economy being shut down, and at what point does that take become more than the cost of the lockdown itself, right? So I think that trade-off is now
Right.
we are approaching that trade-off. So what might happen is that the districts which are categorized as low risk will potentially open up, and even in cities, the more essential part of the services like delivery or supply chains, all of that might open up, but the white collar jobs, the services jobs, which can be done from home, can potentially still be under a lockdown for the next 2-3 weeks. So that is my sense. There would be like a 2-3 step approach here, and the full lockdown removal may only happen, or at least the evaluation of that might only happen maybe by end of April.
Right, right. Great, Ashish. Thank you so much for joining in and for your great insights.
Thank you, Karan.